Well, I did predict the winner of the Super Bowl. I didn't predict the score correctly. And I said, well, if I win, you have to give a donation to the school endowment fund. So maybe we could do a percentage, right? I predicted 14 points and what is it, 3? Did they win by 3? So then you do a fraction. And I don't have, either both teams were not my team, so yeah. So anyway, write out those checks to the school endowment fund. We need your help. Today in the first reading from Leviticus and in the gospel, we receive very tall orders. You shall not bear hatred for your brother or sister. Cherish no grudge against any of your people. Love your neighbor as yourself. And then Jesus steps it up and he says, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you. Is this even possible? Is this even realistic in this world in which we live? I mean, especially people who have been wronged so greatly. I want to tell you about a man named Paul. I have posted his testimony on my Facebook page, so you can go right to the top of my Facebook page and listen to his testimony. It's about 35 minutes long. He's a Catholic man, and he has been through considerable trial, which I'm going to share with you. He found out later in life that his mother considered having him aborted. He was molested by his 2 older brothers and beaten by one of them. He was beaten by his father as well. Later in life, he worked in the fashion industry seeking validation. He fell into dysfunction, he fell into drugs, fell into alcohol, fell into serial relationships. And thankfully, something happened to Paul along the way. He was living in California after a move from the East Coast. And he was in his apartment, channel surfing on the TV. And he happened upon a nun who was a stroke victim, and she was wearing a patch on her eye. And he called his roommate into the room, and they made fun of her, calling her the pirate nun. He turned the TV off, but only after his roommate left the room, and he listened for a few more moments before he turned it off. Later, he would sneak into the TV room and watch this nun for a bit. This nun turned out to be Mother Angelica on EWTN. And he felt attracted to her teaching. But when he was done listening, he would turn the channel of the TV so anyone that turned it on wouldn't see that he was watching EWTN. So he did this. The roommate wouldn't see, or anybody coming over wouldn't see what he had been watching. He said he learned a lot from Mother Angelica. He learned that the truth does exist. There is truth, and it is real, and it does exist. He learned, too, that prayers are answered. He learned that the love of God for his people, for himself, was true and real. And he learned more about the Catholic Church that he had left a long time ago. The light started to come on for Paul. He speaks about this as connecting the dots. Around that time, he felt a very strong prompting when he woke up one morning to call the person whom he said he hated the most in the world The brother who had abused him, who molested him and beat him, he called him up. He felt this very strong prompting. And he said, Joe, you know what you did? And I forgive you. The two, he said, had the best conversation they could have ever engaged in. Joe died a few weeks later after a sudden heart attack. Joe had beaten him, had abused him, had molested him, and he also took their mother's income, savings, squandered it, and whenever Paul would have to deal with Joe, it was to get through to his mother. Joe died, and he said if Joe had died before that phone call, he said, I wouldn't have had the opportunity to forgive him in person. He says now he's the first person in the family he prays for when he prays for the family, which he does frequently. He said that Joe taught him to free himself from hate, to accept God's love. And when we do that, Paul says we can love our worst enemy. To free yourself from hate, to accept God's love for oneself, we can love our worst enemy. Paul was reunited with his mother following this, and she would say the best thing that she ever did was turn away from the possibility of abortion and having him. They are very close. Paul went back to church after a 40-year absence. Again, we ask ourselves today, is this even possible? To not bear hatred for a brother or sister, to cherish no grudge against any of the people, our people, your people, to love your neighbor as yourself, to love your enemies, to pray for those who persecute you. Is this even possible? Through the grace of God, acknowledging God's love for us, the life of Paul says, yes.